Hello. Today is session number 22 of the Electrification Academy. A warm welcome to all of you. The Electrification Academy is run jointly by the International Copper Association Europe and the Regulatory Assistance Project, RAP, to promote the benefits of electrification as the primary energy carrier for a clean energy transition. The webinars are hosted on the Leonardo Energy platform, one of the active roles of copper in the energy transition. Today's session at the Electrification Academy focuses on the decarbonization of transport, and specifically we'll be discussing the vehicle-to-grid or V2X solutions, an innovative technology with strong potential to achieve this decarbonization goal while at the same time reducing overall energy system costs. And therefore we welcome Stefan Doerig, Head of Regulatory Affairs, and Aby Chacko, Head of Energy Services, both from Tiko Energy Solutions. They will share their experiences with these V2G or V2X solutions, detailing a pioneering project in Switzerland. And the aim of that project is to determine the technical feasibility of offering grid services and to assess the added value that V2G technology can provide compared to conventional smart charging. Drawing from Swiss experiences, Stefan and Aby will explore regulatory barriers, operational challenges, but of course also potential solutions to that. But first, let me invite Jaap Burger from the Regulatory Assistance Project to set the stage for us. So Jaap, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Diedert. Thanks for having us, for inviting me. So just very briefly, my name is Jaap Burger. I work for the Regulatory Assistance Project on vehicle electrification and grid integration of electric vehicles. And when we talk about bidirectional charging, we see this as a further development of the topic of smart charging. So smart meaning that we adjust the charging of a vehicle's battery according to various inputs, such as availability of renewable energy, low energy prices, but always within the defined criteria set by the user, because in the end, the vehicle is being used primarily for mobility. Although where I say primarily, actually, if we look at vehicles currently on the road, most vehicles on the road are standing still 90–95% of the time. And especially in this time, it's where this bidirectional charging, so being able to get energy out of the vehicle battery and feed it back into a building or the wider energy system, becomes a very interesting topic. So we're going to dive into that a little bit based on work that we've been doing at the Regulatory Assistance Project, but especially through the very interesting project done in Switzerland, of which Stefan and Aby will tell us many details. So moving forward, if we look at sort of a typical electric vehicle, the battery will be so starting on the top, sort of following the direction of the clock, will be charged during the early hours of the morning because electricity prices are low, other power demand is low. So the vehicle is getting ready to be used. It actually might even discharge a little bit in the morning to cover sort of energy peaks in the building, in the home. Then the car is being driven. Obviously, that consumes electricity from the battery. Coming to the workplace, it might discharge a bit more to keep the EV battery in good shape before being charged using local renewable surplus, solar in this example. Later during the day, the vehicle is being driven again and might provide, again, services to the building and to the grid. So it shows an example of bidirectional charging. And if we talk about bidirectional charging and smart charging, I would say it's sort of a continuation of features. So starting from the left, which covers smart unidirectional as well as smart bidirectional charging, is being able to charge that EV battery when power prices are low. Secondly, it can help reduce peak demand, so reducing when a vehicle is being charged, but obviously bidirectional charging technology can deliver an additional benefit by lowering demand during peak times even more. EVs can play a role in helping to stabilize the frequency of the power system. And I'm quite sure Aby and Stefan will dive into more details of that soon. High energy prices will be a great signal to discharge an EV battery so that the user benefits from the highest return on electricity. And backup power is a use case that is often seen and described as a very important one for bidirectional charging. So being able to power devices when the power grid is down, which, and I'm quite happy to say, isn't that often the case in Europe, but it might be in other regions of the world. So how do we get to use those EV batteries? So currently there are well over 5 million electric vehicles on the road in Europe. Not many of them support bidirectional charging. So we're on the brink of, I would say, mass adoption of bidirectional charging technology from a technology perspective. But how do we make sure that it works for the user and for the power system? So we've outlined 3 principles to start with. The first: building trust and establishing common standards. So that covers trust from the user. Is bidirectional charging being covered by the warranty of the vehicle? Is it being supported by the car maker? Is a vehicle to grid service guaranteeing me as a user that my mobility needs are met? Am I in control, and do I reap the benefits of providing the flexibility from my car's battery? It's also trust from a systems perspective. So our grid operators and system operators and other energy system actors, can they rely on the availability and the effectiveness of EV batteries to help support local grids, to help support the power system? This requires feasibility, knowing where those EV batteries are and what services they can perform. We also need things like smart meters and common standards about measurements and data exchange in place to be able to certify across multiple actors that power flows have been delivered in a certain direction, and we can remunerate it. It also means trust from a business perspective, knowing that they are able to develop services and can access the various markets. So for all that, we also need common technical standards. So knowing that vehicles and chargers can work together, not just today, but also in the future, that they can be upgraded. But also knowing that the rules across Europe are harmonized so that we don't have 27 different rules. Well, actually, we're going to talk about Switzerland. A non-EU member state would be great if, you know, there would be a very similar landscape there as well. Norway, UK. So things that are happening on the European level is a European grid code. We need to make sure that it applies as evenly as possible across the region. A second element that we need to get in place is making sure that we have the right price signals in place to guide both the charging of an EV battery and discharging. And currently many retail tariffs, so the tariffs that consumers face, do not reflect system conditions. So some of them might be able to get some of the benefits from a dynamic wholesale energy price tariff, but local grid situation is not covered by their very flat network tariff. So we need to make sure that we get those prices right and that they are the guiding principle for deciding whether to charge now or to discharge now, or maybe to pause and wait for a better moment, which is coming up soon. And this way we can ensure a really efficient allocation of all those distributed energy resources. And as mentioned, we already have 5 million electric passenger cars in Europe, and the numbers are growing quickly. And we also need, obviously, to make it simple and stress-free for the user. So these prices need to be in place, but not necessarily need to be sent to the end user, but they need to be sent to a device or a smartphone app or a service that performs the optimization of the charging and discharging. And then thirdly, we need to ensure equal access and treatment of all energy resources, especially those of smaller nature, distributed nature, like cars being charged at home, at workplaces. So they're at various locations, but they can be managed in a very granular way. We need to make sure that they can deliver the same services to the power system as existing, let's say, fossil peak power plants. I'm not going to dive into all the details of this because there's actually the previous webinar in this Electrification Academy series, great presentation from EA and Acer on specifically getting the access conditions right for distributed energy resources like smart EV charging. So wrapping up, our principles to make sure that bidirectional charging is turned into successful vehicle-to-grid, so an interaction with the power system. We need to build trust and establish common standards. We need to get the prices right so that they can guide the charging and discharging of EV batteries. And we need to ensure equal access and treatment of these smaller distributed energy resources so that they can participate in all markets. Now I'm going to hand over to Stefan and Aby for their part on the project that they've been working on in Switzerland, which is a really interesting use case because it's actually also one of the first real-world applications using the CCS standard plug. And I think most EV drivers will be familiar with this plug because it has been already sort of the common European standard for fast charging EVs. But it's also a prime example of how standardization enables various components of systems from various manufacturers to work together. They will dive into some of the challenges and learnings of this. So looking forward to that. Handing over to you, Stefan.
Thank you very much, and welcome everyone. And thank you to the Regulatory Assistance Project and the International Copper Association for the invitation. I am Stefan, and together with my colleague Aby, I have the pleasure to give you an overview of our experience within the V2X Suisse project. But briefly, before diving into the subject, I would like to say a few words about tiko. tiko is an aggregator and a technology provider for home energy management systems, smart charging and virtual power plants, founded in 2012 in Switzerland and still operating one of the biggest, first and biggest virtual power plants based on household assets. We are, since 2019, part of the ENGIE group, and our 60+ employees work from our headquarters in Zurich and from offices in Milan and Paris. And as you can see on the map on the right-hand side, within our history, we have had clients and projects in Europe, but also in Australia and New Zealand. You will see later that we approach V2G in a rather pragmatic way. For us, an aggregator, a V2G car is just a battery on wheels, and when connected to the grid, it can be used as an asset, delivering flexibility to the power system, like heat pumps, like electric heaters, or like stationary batteries. Having said this, what makes V2G special, though, is the clash of two huge strategic, important, and emotional also sectors, energy and transport. And of course, the potential, which is gigantic and makes an aggregator slightly nervous and puts him on alert. Which leads us to the agenda of our presentation. I will first present the project in general terms. give then the floor to Aby for the learnings, and I will be back for the regulatory aspect, some regulatory aspect before we certainly have time for questions and the discussion. The project, first things first, is about the team. The project was done by 6 main partners: Mobility, Honda, Sun2Wheel, which is a software developer, EV-Tech, a charging station developer, Tiko, and Novatlantis, which is a consultant. The scientific part has been done with ETH of Zurich, and financially we were supported by the Swiss Federal Office of Energy. Mobility had the project lead. Mobility is a car-sharing company. It is a Swiss institution organized as a cooperative and founded in 1997. Nowadays, they serve 250,000 clients in Switzerland, and their fleet is composed of around 3,000 cars. Some years ago, they decided to go electric, and were wondering if V2G would be a technology which would help them to enhance their business case. Thus, the motivation to initiate V2X Suisse, the project. When you have to look at the partner, you see that they cover a large part of the V2G value chain. And yes, let me mention already one learning from the project. You need the right companies, you need the right people to succeed. Luckily, in this project, we had them, we had the right people on board. Yes, we worked hard, but we also had a lot of fun, and we obtained some quite remarkable results. This is the fleet. That's the cars we were working with. It's 50 Honda e-cars. The bidirectional charging was done via CCS connectors, and each battery had the power of 11 kilowatt. The project ran from September 2022 until March 2024, until recently, involving these 50 Honda e-cars, which were available for regular car sharing at 40 sites all across Switzerland. You can see the sites on the map on the slide. 3,500 customers have already covered around 400,000 kilometers in these bidirectional vehicles. And the good news is, from Mobility side, it works. Mobility is a car-sharing company and not a power broker, so for them, it is of paramount importance that their clients are not negatively affected by the project in particular, and then, of course, V2G in general. And then again, that was not the case, so already a good outcome from Mobility's point of view. What were the main goals of the project? We started with 3 questions. The first one, how to charge efficiently, exploring the best ways, how to stabilize the grid and enhance self-consumption optimization, how to use flexibility, testing real-world value of flexibility for different users, in our case, TSO Swissgrid, but also distribution system operators and self-consumption communities. And last, but definitely not least, how to create a business case. How can a car-sharing company like Mobility earn money with V2G and recover at the end their initial investments? In the following, we will focus on the V2G case only, leaving V2H, V2 Home, and other applications to the ones with more expertise. The V2G case was organized as depicted on the slide on the left-hand side. If we start at the bottom, bottom right, the Honda cars were plugged into EV-Tech charging stations, exchanging not only power, but of course also data which then flew to the software platform provided by Sun2Wheel, which on the other hand, the other way around, gave the direct signals to the charging station to charge or discharge the car. The Honda cars were also connected to the booking platform of Mobility. And this booking platform was quite a distinctive feature of this project, because Mobility is a car-sharing company, and this booking platform already existed, and of course helped a lot to plan and to forecast the availability or the availability of the cars and the available flexibility of the fleet. Sun2Wheel then collected all this data and delivered it to tiko, so that tiko, at our side, we always knew how many cars are available, for how long, and with how much capacity. And with this information, we could make our bids on the ancillary services market, and could, the other way around, then send signals down to Sun2Wheel when we need more or less power. For me, that is already technical details enough, and I'm happy to give the floor now to our master of the virtual power plant, Aby, please.
So Stefan, thank you very much for the introduction. So on my part now, I'll be going a bit into the learning. So first I'll explain on a very high level the technology, what we are using, and then get into the use cases, okay? So the slide that we see now is the technical concept on how we do flexibility with the technology in this project. So what, as Stefan said, the main stakeholders are Sun2Wheel, the mobility reservation system, and the charger, and the Honda cars. So I think one major uniqueness of this project, which is not in a residential project, is since the users of the sharing system reserve the car in advance, we have the reservation data. So the Sun2Wheel IT platform links to the mobility platform, and they get an update every half an hour about the reservation of the cars. So that means we have got a good visibility of how the cars are going to be reserved. So that is one unique data that we have. Then the tiko system has integrated with the Sun2Wheel system, where we get from the reservation data of the car, that's on the higher level, but also we get the power consumption of the car as well as the SOC of the car for on a individual level of each charger level. So this is data that we get, and what do we do with that? We have to, in order to offer grid services to the TSO, you've got a power withholding and you've got an energy activation. So the algorithm calculates what power we could bid. And then when there's an energy activation, we split the signal into the number of cars. So each car gets a signal from us, and then Sun2Wheel interface gives it to the charger, and the charger gives it to the car. And here it's just to be very clear, since we had only 33 cars in our pool, so from the 50, 17 of the cars were being used for a DSO project. So we had 33 cars. So in total, we had around 250 kilowatt of flex. When you bid to a TSO, the minimum amount you can increase your bid amount is 1 megawatt. So what we could not really bid, because you don't reach this 1 megawatt threshold with that. So what we are doing is we are taking the real signals from the TSO and following the real signals. So delayed, but for example, taking the real frequency of the grid and following the frequency of the grid. So this is the technical concept. Then the next slide. So one interesting point is what we see also from the reservation data of mobility. It's again a car sharing company. It's not really an automobile. It is more of an auto stationary, because from the data we know a normal car is booked only 25% of the time over a year. It depends where it is. In a city, it's more. In a rural location, it's even less. So basically, what we are telling is 75% of the time the battery is there, and then technically available for flexibility. The other interesting point that we see is, because this is always the discussion that we have, is there enough charge after we do flexibility? So what we see is 90% of the mobility sessions which the car users take and bring back, and this is including the diesel and petrol cars. So it's not only EV, it's the complete pool, what I analyzed. 90% of the mobility sessions are shorter than 100 kilometers. That means in general, you have got short sessions, and today's cars, they easily have a range of between 350 to 400 kilometers. So this is also one aspect which goes into the direction of using for flexibility. Then a very simple representation of what is the control strategy that we use to offer flexibility. Why? In the project, one of the main aims is that these cars are being used like normal cars by mobility customers. So we don't want in any way to impact their user experience. So we have to make sure that when the user does not feel anything, even though we are using it for flexibility. So how do we implement that? basically what we have done is, the concept is, when a car plugs in, we have defined a minimum state of charge. And state of charge is the critical point, because what we don't want is the user to get worried, will I have enough charge to reach my destination and be back? So we have defined different minimum state of charge. So when a car plugs in, it first goes into a mobility mode. That means in the mobility mode, tiko does not control the car. And in the mobility mode, the car is first charged to a defined state of charge, minimum state of charge. Then it enters the flexibility mode. In the flexibility mode, tiko is allowed to control the car. And before the reservation time, so 1 hour, half an hour before the reservation time, depending on how long the car has to drive, it again enters the mobility mode, leaves the flex mode, and tiko stops controlling the car. With that, we ensure when the customer enters the car, he has a minimum SOC. So we have tried to keep it as simple as possible. There are a lot of improvements we can do, but we have kept it very simple. And this has worked very well. In my experiences, I will share a bit of the learnings that we did. And now we see, so the question is always, how do you calculate the available flexibility? And the available flexibility depends a lot on the product characteristics. Okay, what is the product? How does the TSO or energy supplier wants to have the product delivered? So what you see here is an example of how we calculate on a very simple level. There are much more details behind that. The available flexibility for a TSO product called frequency containment reserves. So it's a 4-hour product. That means when you bid into that auction, you must at least be able to withhold the power for 4 hours. So what you see on this picture is, on the y-axis, the days of the week, and on the x-axis, the 6 4-hour blocks. And the darker the color is, it tells there were more number of cars plugged in during those 4 hours. So what you see is, early morning on Monday, 0 to 4, you've got 23 cars plugged in. And during the daytime, more customers are using it. So you've got less cars plugged in, and which gives a very simple interpretation of how much flexibility we can have. So there are two things to be considered. One is the number of cars plugged in, and the second is the state of charge. What is the state of charge of the car? And this decides how much flexibility I'll have. So basically what we do is, for an hourly product, when you are going to bid for an hour, we do the same analysis first on an hour by hour level. Okay, so on that, we get a very good overview of how much flexibility we can indeed offer, even when we try to scale up the pool. Okay, then let's go to the next slide. So now we get to the use cases. What are the use cases that you have for flexibility as a VPP operator? So there are basically 3 stakeholders. So the first is the energy supplier, who buys the energy in the market and then supplies these chargers. And you can optimize the energy for the energy supply. That is one use case we have. The second is the TSO, that's a transmission system operator. And the TSO is responsible to ensure that the grid is electrically balanced at every time. And for that, how does he do that? In Europe, he procures ancillary services. There are different products, FCR, AFRR, with different characteristics. And he procures that via auctions. The third stakeholder who can use the flexibility services at DSO, that's the distribution system operator, that's on the low voltage side. And what does the offer for the DSO look like? Like, you can shift your peak consumption, that the local transformer is not overloaded. That's another use case. So the focus of tiko's part in the project was the energy supply and the TSO. So today we'll be only going to that part of the presentation. Then, so what does day-ahead energy optimization look like? So it's the energy supply use case. What does the energy supply do? He buys energy to fill his load profile of all its customers. And one way he will do is, a part of the energy will be bought much in advance, but a certain portion of the energy will be optimized in the day-ahead auction. Then there's an intraday auction. So basically it's the same thing, but the time duration shortens. So in a day-ahead optimization, what really happens is, you've got an auction. In Europe, it is D-1 at 12:55, the results are published, and for every hour, you've got a price. So as an energy supplier, what you do is, okay, you can have a contract with, for example, with mobility and say, okay, you must ensure that you charge during the low price hours, and during the high price hours, you discharge into the grid. And for that amount, they sell or they buy in these hours. So this is very important here. It's the energy supplier who's doing the trading. Yeah? And what does mobility have? The mobility can get a better energy pricing. Yeah? So this is not on an individual customer level. It is done by the trading department. So this is not to be considered like the dynamic price tariff of each individual customer. It is like mobility can go with this 3,000 cars to an energy supplier and say, okay, I can do the service for you. What can you offer me in return? You know, like better energy prices and stuff like that. So what you see here on the left is an example of a day ahead pricing. And you have got the low prices. That's typical. Early morning till 6 o'clock, it's low prices. And late in the night after 10 o'clock. And then from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the evening, you have got the normal high price hours. And you see the early morning is the very good example where the prices are very high. And then that's the time where you discharge into the grid. And before that, during the night hours, you charge your car. And it's a portfolio effect. And you can think of it like a pump storage power plant on a very simple level. That is the theory. And on the right, you see the operations that we did. So you see the early evening peak, 18 hours, where it is costly hours, so we discharge into the grid. And then early morning, 1 o'clock to 6 o'clock, we have 2 blocks where we have then told the cars to charge. Okay, so it's from a technology perspective, very simple. It's the interaction with the trading department where this challenge is. Okay, Stefan, next slide. Then we get to the second use case, that is the ancillary services part. So this is the more challenging part from a technical perspective. And this was one of the main targets of the project. Why is it challenging? The TSO needs to stabilize the grid. And for that, there are technical characteristics to be fulfilled. So one example is the product. Frequency control reserves, we call the old name is primary control reserves. This is used to stabilize the frequency so that it is within a tolerance band from the 50 Hertz. And this has to react very fast. So one of the criteria from the TSO is from a frequency, from the moment a frequency change has been detected, you have to show the first reaction within 2 seconds, and you have to deliver 100% of your power that you promised within 30 seconds. So it's a very fast product, we call it. And then the question was, on a pure cloud-to-cloud connection, can we achieve this technical limitations? This first reaction, 2 seconds, and then you have to deliver the 100% of the power within 30 seconds. So, and what you see here is a test what the TSO demands to prove that your technology can deliver the primary frequency control. And so this is a real test that we did. It's a hysteresis band test that is typical in Switzerland. And so this is the same test a water power plant has to do and prove. So the TSOs do not differentiate between technologies. It's one test, you have to prove it. And that is one example. On the right, you see the secondary control operation. And here, that was a pre-qualification test where we had to prove to the TSO. And then we had almost the 6 months of operations where we did the real operation. So on the left, what you see is the primary control. The green line is you're following a signal. The frequency is increasing or decreasing depending on that you're telling the pool of cars to charge or discharge. The same thing with the AFRR on the right side. You get a signal from the TSO. And if the TSO says, I have got less energy in the grid, you tell the cars to discharge. So this is an example of a car discharging. So basically what we did is we did the pre-qualification test and operations. We validated that we can also operate it at a pool level. Next slide, Stefan. So we come to the main learnings from the flexibility delivery part of the project, TICO's project. So the conclusion is one sentence. Technically, we have proved that we can deliver the fast reserve. So this was always a challenge. And the confirmation is you get a technical pre-qualification from the TSO, confirming that you have passed the test. Why do you say technical pre-qualification? For the complete pre-qualification, you have to do the test with this minimum bid amounts. So in this case, we did with smaller power, but basically it's you just add the cars and the reaction time has to remain the same. So we prove that, and this is a world premiere, and it's the specificity is it's with CCS chargers, bidirectional, and a car sharing pool. So this has already been done in other countries, but that's with another plug standard called CHAdeMO, and that's a standard which is not very widespread in Europe. So the positive part is that technical feasibility could be demonstrated. The negative part of the project is more on the regulation commercially, but what we see is it's the high cost of the V2G infrastructure. So the example is a charger cost today around 13,000 francs. It's very high. We don't have enough OEMs who make vehicle to grid technology or which is available, and you've got less models available in the market. And then you've got a bunch of regulatory aspects into which Stefan will delve into now. Thank you.
Thank you, Aby. I'm back with the regulatory aspects. At tiko, we have been dealing with regulatory aspects of V2G before V2X Suisse, and therefore we already knew that Switzerland is not a flex heaven, at least not yet. In order to cluster the different aspects of relevance for V2G, we have arranged them in three main categories. One is the storage regulation, so it's an equal treatment of all technologies, no double taxation, and also a pragmatic solution for guarantees of origin. The last point is important when you think about solar power from your roof stored in the battery of your car and then discharged at your workplace, for example. How can you prove that the electricity you discharge is actually green? How we deal with that is still an open question. The second aspect is flexibility regulation. Transparency in the distribution grid, still not available. We do not exactly know where the bottlenecks in the grid are or will be. Restriction of access rights for grid operators. Of course, the more access rights they have, the less flexibility is available for others. And market mechanisms for local flexibility. These local flexibility markets, which are still in its infancy, also when you look across the Swiss borders. And then access to the markets. There is all about open access to all markets for aggregators, no discrimination against small suppliers, and in the Swiss case, also access or easy access to the European electricity market. Without going into detail, Swiss regulation performs quite poorly when it comes to demand-side flexibility and V2G. The reason I'm cautiously optimistic when it comes to storage regulation is a new provision in the energy law, which is most probably implemented next year. The poor performance is also reflected in the recent Smart N LCP Delta market monitor for demand-side flexibility, where Switzerland ranks among the low development countries. This does not mean that V2G is impossible entirely in Switzerland, but to scale, and Aby also already mentioned that, to scale, which is a precondition to have a viable business case, Switzerland has to do still massive changes also on the regulatory side of things. And as mentioned, one step in that direction could be this Article 14 in the new energy law. It is about double taxation of small storage assets, stationary and mobile ones. The issue is also being discussed on EU level and in various member states, but it could actually one of the very rare cases where Switzerland is moving faster than others on the regulatory side. According to the new article, the exemption from new network tariffs applies for pump storage, and that is important as before, because that was one of the main arguments for us or for the article that we need equal treatment of all storage technologies. Then pure grid storage, so the storage that does take electricity from the grid and feeds it back into the grid. And then, of course, what is important to us, the storage in small batteries with final consumption. and after feeding back electricity into the grid. In addition to that, we have power to X in certain cases and for limited pilot projects. There are two important caveats here. One is the feeding back electricity into the grid. So only the electricity that has provenly come from the grid and fed back into the grid is exempted from network tariffs. That's one. And the other important thing is the reimbursement for storage with final consumption, and for V2X project as well, is only granted after or on application. So we have to prove, or the storage owner has to prove, what amount of electricity comes from the grid. It has been stored in the battery and flows back to the grid. And yeah, there comes some bad news with that. The implementation of the provision has turned out to be very tricky. There have been a lot of discussions also recently, and most probably we will have to live with a gradual implementation. That's not nothing, but it's not moving as fast as we would have wished for. We are facing technical challenge, obviously, but sometimes also resistance from other players, especially from distribution system operators. I'm optimistic we will get there step by step, and well, after all, it would be a mistake to leave the huge potential that I've mentioned at the beginning of V2G untapped. And with that, I give back the floor to the moderation, and